Chapter 1: The Person at the Gate. I installed a security camera after someone started leaving objects outside my house. At first, it was small things. A bottle of water placed neatly beside the front gate, a folded newspaper on the doorstep, a single flower left on the garden wall. Nothing threatening, nothing that would normally make someone call the police. But nobody in my neighborhood admitted leaving them. I lived alone, and my house was at the end of a quiet street. There was no reason for strangers to walk past my property, especially because the road ended about 50 meters after my driveway. After the third week, I bought a camera. The first few nights showed nothing unusual. Cars passing, a neighbor walking their dog, the occasional cat moving through the garden. Then, on a Tuesday morning, I received a motion alert at 3:17 a.m. I opened the recording, expecting to see an animal. Instead, I saw a person standing at my gate. They were facing directly towards the camera. The strange thing was that they were not trying to enter. They were simply standing there for almost 9 minutes. The camera had a clear view of the person's clothing, but not their face. They wore a dark coat and stood completely still. Then, without turning around, they walked backwards away from the gate until they disappeared into the darkness. I contacted the police. They reviewed the footage and asked if I recognized the person. I said no. They asked if anyone had access to my property. Again, no. They advised me to upgrade the locks and keep recording. The following night, the same person appeared. Same time, same location, same posture, but this time they were holding something. A photograph. They held it against the gate so the camera could see it. It was a picture of my house, not a recent picture, an old photograph taken before I bought the property. I recognized it because the previous owners had left some documents behind. I called the police again. This time they took it more seriously. An officer visited the next morning and examined the image from the camera. Then he asked me a question. Did you know the previous owner? I said no. He looked at the photograph again. The person in the footage had not been holding a picture of the house. They had been holding a picture of a woman standing in front of it. The previous owner's wife. The officer recognized her. She had disappeared 12 years earlier. The case had never been solved. The woman in the photograph had been the last known image of her before she vanished. Police investigated the footage, but could not identify the person at my gate. The camera quality was not enough to capture their face. They also found no fingerprints, footprints, or evidence that anyone had entered the property. I moved out 3 months later. Before leaving, I removed the camera. I checked the final recording one last time. The person appeared at 3:17 a.m. They placed the photograph against the gate. Then they looked directly into the camera. For the first time, I could see their face. It was the missing woman, and she was pointing behind the camera. Chapter 2: The Camera That Watched Itself. My friend worked as a security guard at a storage facility. The building contained hundreds of private storage units and was monitored by cameras throughout the property. His job was mostly routine, checking doors, walking the halls, reviewing alerts. The cameras had motion detection, and whenever movement was detected after midnight, security received a notification. One night, he received an alert from camera 12. The camera showed movement in corridor B. He opened the live feed. The corridor was empty. He assumed it was a false alert. Then the camera moved. Not physically. The image changed angle. Camera 12 was mounted high in the corner of the corridor and normally faced straight down the hallway. But now the feed showed the opposite direction. It was showing the back of itself. My friend thought the system had malfunctioned. Then he noticed something. The camera was visible in the image, and standing beside it was a person who should not have been there. He immediately went to corridor B. When he arrived, nobody was there. The camera was still mounted in its original position. Nothing had been moved. He checked the recording. At 1:43 a.m., the camera feed changed. The image showed the camera itself. Then a figure walked into view and stood beside it. The person looked directly into the lens. They were wearing an old security uniform. My friend reported it to management. They checked employee records. The uniform belonged to a guard named Michael Harris. He had worked there 15 years earlier. He disappeared during a night shift. Nobody knew what happened to him. The company had changed ownership twice since then, and most employees had never heard his name. The next night, my friend watched camera 12 continuously. At exactly 1:43 a.m., the feed changed again. This time, the camera showed the storage hallway, but the figure was not standing beside the camera. It was standing behind my friend. He turned around. The hallway was empty. Then the radio on his belt activated. A voice came through, a male voice. "Don't stay until the cameras turn off." My friend left immediately. The following morning, the company checked the entire system. They found no technical explanation. However, they discovered something strange. Camera 12 had been scheduled to be replaced the next day. When technicians removed it, they found an old handwritten note taped behind it. The note simply said, "I saw him too." Nobody knew who wrote it. Agove, Chapter 3, The Doorbell Recording. My parents installed a smart doorbell after retirement. They wanted extra security because they traveled frequently and worried about packages being stolen. The system worked normally for almost a year. Then one evening, my mother received a notification. Someone was at the door. She opened the recording. A man was standing outside. He looked directly into the camera. Then he said my father's name, not a nickname, his full name. My mother immediately checked outside. Nobody was there. She assumed it was someone who knew them, maybe a neighbor, maybe a delivery worker. But nobody in the neighborhood recognized the man. The next night, the same thing happened. Same person, same time, same sentence. He said my father's name. Then he walked away. My parents contacted the police. Officers reviewed the footage and asked whether my father knew him. He said no. Then one officer noticed something unusual. The man's clothing. It was a uniform from a company that no longer existed. The officer asked my father whether he had ever worked with that company. My father said yes. 40 years earlier, the company had employed him when he was young. The officer showed him an old employee photograph. My father immediately recognized the man. He was his former supervisor, a man who died decades earlier. My father insisted it was impossible. The police could not identify the person in the recording. The face was clear enough to see, but their database returned no match. The doorbell company also investigated. They found no evidence that the footage had been edited or manipulated. A week later, the notification appeared again. This time, the man did not say my father's name. He said, "You forgot something." My father opened the door. Nobody was there, but on the doorstep was a small box. Inside was an old employee badge. My father's badge, the one he lost 40 years earlier. He had searched for it for months before eventually replacing it. The police kept the badge for investigation. They found no fingerprints, no explanation. My father removed the doorbell the next day. He never wanted to know how it happened. Years later, he still keeps the badge in a drawer. Not because he believes the man was trying to scare him, because he believes the opposite. He believes the man came back to return something that was never meant to stay lost.